Let them in.
On its face was racing strips of flesh.
I am sure just about all of you have recognized the surge in parallel dimensions and alternate realities taking over the analog horror world. And let me tell you that the multiverse train is far from over, considering in today's video we have some more worlds to explore. You all let me know that Arcadia TV has had 2 new entries released, and I knew right away that I was going to have to check them out. Arcadia TV certainly has a lot going on in it, so if you haven't already, I highly recommend you check out Chilling Abyss to make sure you're all caught up. I'll also have links down below for our last 2 videos on Arcadia TV. However, I'll try my best to catch you all up. Arcadia TV takes us to a world where a John Walker, no, not that one, manages to create a machine that can send signals out to different realities. However, in the quest to speak to just one alternate dimension, a separate one ended up appearing as well, which then tries to intercept the physical link that our 2 main worlds are attempting to forge. We then are able to see a whole infinite array of other worlds that we now know exist. The world of Arcadia TV now has to deal with fissures, which are these dimensional vacuums that can open up anywhere and suck you into a different world, and then replace you with something else. This has led to numerous anomalous entities running around and terrorizing the surrounding areas. However, we last left off after one of the lab employees, Ian Parker, takes part in this odd experiment called The Farm, which appears to be a VR game, but it is in fact connected to this machine. So I believe Ian Parker may have been subconsciously dimension hopping, to which he encounters this odd entity that claims that they were once a human, and are just observing the events that are to come. The current theory is that this odd entity is an alternate John Walker, considering it claims to have created the first signal, and their world was lost to the abyss. And now it seems Ian Parker has been thrust into a larger role to play in the series, and I'm very curious to see what he must do to potentially stop this reality madness. As always, be sure to check out the original series, considering there is so much lore and so much going on that it is truly a treat to experience it firsthand. However, let's put on our spacesuits and prepare to head out once again into the multiverse of Arcadia TV. But before I let you get too far, just wanted to say if you're new here and enjoy what you're watching, be sure to hit all those neat buttons down below, including the subscribe and bell notification so you can be a part of every new upload. Also, real quick, just wanted to mention that me and some of the gang are going to be at Phoenix Fan Fusion all 3 days, June 6th through the 8th. Not affiliated with the event in any way, just going to have a fun time, so if any of you already have your tickets or were planning on it, you might see some familiar faces. Be sure to follow us on our Instagram to get more details as the event comes closer. But anyways, now you can pass through. Paid Programming. Tape 12. The first thing we are met with this tape is this TV guide that actually supplies quite a bit of info. We can see that an episode of Midnight Safety Guide is up next, featuring false dogs. What's up with dogs making a frequent appearance in analog horrors lately? We can also see down at the bottom a headline that says more cities in Alaska are now under the curfew. For those who recall, we learned earlier in the series that the exclusion zone is in fact expanding, and some fissures have been found forming on the opposite end of the wall. The footage ends up cutting out, however, and we are brought to what appears to be this dark forest, to which a mysterious voice comes in and essentially confirms just that. The voice goes on to say that the abyss is spreading, and it's consuming, but then the voice goes on to tell us not to fight, and not to run. He then refers to it as the Endless, and says our God will not protect us. The last time we got text in a similar fashion would have been in The Farm, where Ian Parker was talking to who I imagine is alternate John Walker. So I think it's safe to say that this voice talking to us is Mr. Walker, and his comments about not fighting and not running actually seem a little in character. If this is alternate John Walker and he is from a world that has already been consumed by the abyss, then it makes sense that he would have this sort of brainwashed outlook on it. But we then cut to footage taking us inside of this home, and the camera honestly eerily moves back to reveal more of the home, before the camera is then set down on a table. The footage then again cuts to black, and we hear our familiar voice once more.
They are outside. Do not resist. Let them in.
Yeah, I'm not letting anything in, I'll tell you that much. The voice then goes on to claim that they can't be stopped, and that this isn't our world anymore. The control is no longer ours. Our footage cuts and we are brought back inside the house. We can hear the TV on in the background, but quickly we hear a voice in the back on the phone with somebody, and it sounds like they are calling emergency services. According to our character, he was trying to get the Anomalous Awareness Association to take care of an entity he had in his home, but since the association didn't recognize the entity, he was instructed to vacate. He claims that he can't just abandon his home, and you can't really blame him. But if there is a giant strange entity in the house, you may just want to cut your losses. But in a shocking turn of events, our character has another idea, and it may just be crazy enough to get him killed.
They weren't fooling when they said they was going to raid the dam.
You see this? This is what I'm going to use to kill it.
After we cut to black, we return to our villainous voice, and he actually comes with quite the revelation.
That is your god now.
We had seen that little dot in the sky before in the last video, but little did I know it was going to be held as some sort of god. Not only that, a real god, a true one.
We could rule them like gods. Angry gods.
He asks if we are afraid, and honestly, a little bit, yeah. The voice then claims that all of our previous gods never listened to us. In fact, they were never real to begin with. We return to the house, and over the TV, we actually get to hear some news on what's happening in the background. It sounds like Canada and the US are in a bit of a spat over the Alaskan borders. I guess Canada is starting to get affected due to the anomalous spillage going on over at the wall. The TV then gets shut off by our character, however, and very slowly, we see as his little problem comes out from the darkness. He lowers his gun, and when I tell you, this scene is pretty sick.
Oh, shit!
Damn, probably should have just vacated, man. I gotta say, the fact that the entity is hidden the entire time, and only through the first brief reveal is it shown just how much larger this thing is than initially expected. But then to only get to see a full look in only a brief flash frame from the blast, that's worthy of a chef's kiss right there. However, the next bit we cut to, I also wasn't expecting, to say the least. It appears that we have stumbled upon a strange animated Muppet show, where our creepy little guy here takes questions from viewers. The first question taken is from Sarah, and would you look at that? The question is if we believe in God. The puppet is taken a bit aback by the question, but a knock can then be heard off to the side. The puppet turns to look at this door, and claims that it's just a visitor, and says they can come right on in. The door is unlocked after all. What occurs next is a very odd staring contest between the puppet and the door to finish off this tape. I gotta say, I really like that it immediately feels like we are in a new chapter of Arcadia. There's enough new and fresh material shown off here, but there's also just enough callbacks to previous events to still make it connected to Arcadia as a whole. The moments with John Walker narrating were especially eerie. I like how each shot was framed as if the area was being taken over by the Abyss, making me believe this could all be images from alternate John's world, already taken over by the Abyss. I'd already mentioned it, but I'll say it again. The monster scene was also really cool. The design for the brief frame we see of it looks a lot like either a mimic from Vita Carnis or the entity at the end of the Smile movies. I am definitely both excited and afraid to see more of these creatures in the future, and I am especially worried about the fact that our world is supposedly no longer ours. Monsters. Tape 13. We open up, and it looks like we are being brought into the archives of the Anomalous Awareness Association. The first case we end up looking at is numbered 1903, labeled Monsters. Would you look at that? We slowly fade in on this camera footage dating us on February 2nd, 1993, and if I'm not mistaken, that puts us the latest in the timeline. All we can see in the footage is someone sitting on this bench. However, we end up moving towards this text that explains a few things. In early 1993, numerous people went missing in the town of blank. The majority of those people were homeless. An investigation led authorities to a home. For the first time, the Anomalous Awareness Association was dispatched to the contiguous, always one, there's always a word. The Anomalous Awareness Association was dispatched to the contiguous United States for an organic threat. Our footage ends up cutting out, however, and takes us to this employee file page, owned by You guessed it, Ian Parker. We can see that a lot of these files have been corrupted, but it looks like we are interested in the year 1978. Looking at all the years, we can see that only the years 1978, 1980, and 1983 are available. From what I can find looking back, 1980 was the date they sent out the first signal, and the date Ian Parker played the farm and communicated with potentially alternate John. Then 1983 was the day Parallel World 2 intercepted the connection, and the site exploded. So I'm curious to learn what happened in 1978. What we end up cutting to next has us looking and listening to different things. The audio playing sounds like a call between Ian Parker and this lady, but on screen we are watching some more footage from a video camera dated February 2nd, 1993. Ian states his name and date of birth for the session, and it sounds like this lady is some sort of psychologist. Apparently in a previous session, Ian was asked what he was most afraid of, to which the question put him off. So as always, in this session it gets brought up again. Ian goes on to talk about how he saw something when he was younger, and he doesn't like thinking about it, and whatever it is still brings him nightmares. We end up quickly cutting to this Polaroid picture of someone holding their hand out, with text at the bottom that just says pray. This is leading me to believe that our person operating the camera does not have good intentions. If the homeless are being kidnapped, and our first footage had us literally in the bushes stalking a homeless person, it's 2 + 2, you know. The photo being labeled pray also doesn't help. What's interesting, however, is that we were looking through that camera during the audio interview, so it seems like our kidnapper is very human looking. Is it just a person? The next Polaroid photo we get, however, is of this woman looking unconscious, with the text just saying her. Then our next photo is definitely more graphic, where it looks like the lady may have been shot. This time all the text says is feed. Okay, maybe she wasn't shot. It sounds like her fate was actually a whole lot worse. We then learn that there were hundreds of photos scattered throughout the home, to which by home I'm guessing this is the place we heard about earlier that investigators were led to. We are then shown yet another photo, except this time it is of the sky, featuring our self-titled brand new God light. Investigators are quick to point out that each photo contains either a word or short phrase written on the back. Some of them, however, had these strange symbols drawn on. If I had to guess, this dot in the middle is supposed to be either the Earth or a moon, and our separate dot could be whatever that light is we saw in the sky earlier. But our footage then cuts out, and we are taken to this message being sent over to admin. And if our person operating the computer is truly who they say they are, then I think this is the lady that was interviewing Ian Parker, named Elizabeth Woods. She writes, "I have noticed that most of Ian Parker's employee files on the archival terminal are corrupted. I am working on a time-sensitive report that requires these files. Could this be addressed as soon as possible?" We can see below that Elizabeth is the head psychologist. Something interesting to note as well is our date at the top, August 23rd, 1993, putting us even further in the timeline. However, we are then brought back to the conversation between Ian and Elizabeth. She asks him what it was exactly he saw, to which Ian begins to tell his tale. Apparently when he was 11, he went out hunting with his dad, and I can't help to mention that our footage is once again from who I believe is our kidnapper, and it looks like he has another victim. But back to the story. It sounds like hunting was not something Ian particularly enjoyed, but his father would make him go anyway. During the middle of the night, Ian was reading a book. Coincidentally, Theory of the Parallel, John Walker's book. Ian describes that he then had to use the bathroom, and as he is telling the story, we can see as our victim isn't dead yet, as they weakly lift up their hands, but we see the flash as our kidnapper takes a photo of them. Ian was super hesitant to use the bathroom because he was afraid of the dark, but he was more afraid of waking up his dad, which I guess is pretty telling. Ian musters up the courage, gets a flashlight, and heads out of the tent. He describes how he then went to find a tree, but in the background we can see as another tape begins to play from our kidnapper. This time we are dated on March 16th, 1993, and it looks like a lady has been knocked out cold. However, according to Ian, after he found a tree and placed his flashlight on the ground, he heard a noise coming from somewhere in the woods. The noise was enough to freak out Ian, as he said it sounded like it was getting closer. But that's when he saw it, something that produced a horrible noise and looked like a dead dog. Ian says it looked like its face was missing. Quite the brutal description. As he goes on, we can then see in the tape a hand reaching out from the dark, heading towards the body. We end up moving on from the audio segment and back to text. where we learn that a journal was found in this mysterious home investigators are at. Apparently, the journal contained unintelligible writings and sketches, and only a few have been deciphered. But the next bit we get to read contains quite the interesting info. February 3rd. She was my only friend, the only person I cared for. Why? Why did I do it? Why did I listen to it? How did it know her name? February 17th. The air is thick with the smell of decay. My eyes burn when it speaks. It tells me strange stories. It requests for more. March 22nd. The constant feeding, the unending hunger. It only wants those it has chosen. When will it be enough? April 12th. It no longer speaks, but I still hear its voice. The pain in my head is getting worse. My nose and ears bleed frequently. What is happening to me? April 27th. It has shown me the future. It will awaken. I must prepare. May 9th. It knows I have been feeding on them as well. It wants me to come closer. We then quickly get flashed another email, this time a response to Elizabeth's request for those files. Apparently, according to admin, however, they have been restructuring, and now those files require higher clearance. So now Elizabeth doesn't get to have access to any files related to Site Bravo, which is the area that exploded. There's a lot to uncover and unpack there, but let's save that for later. We end up returning to our conversation between Elizabeth and Ian, and according to Ian, his dad ended up finding him in the morning. Sounds like he never made it back to camp. Ian tries to then tell his dad what it is he saw, but as to be expected, he didn't believe him, saying it was all in Ian's head. Interestingly enough, however, later in the night, Ian's dad had to go off and take care of something, but when he came back, he claims to have seen the dog as well. While the story is unfolding, we witness a tape playing out where it looks like our kidnapper is perhaps bleeding, or just covered in that much blood to be dripping. But returning to the story, Ian's dad chalked what he saw up to someone's lost dog, to which he ended up putting it out of its misery, which, if it was truly missing a face, probably for the better. But oddly enough, it was his dad who ordered that this story never get repeated again, which seems a little weird to me. However, that was the end of their session, and we get to hear about Elizabeth's afterthoughts. It sounds like this event has turned into a whole fear of dogs for Ian, which leaves Elizabeth a little concerned. What's also concerning is the footage happening in the background, where it looks like our kidnapper has a secret red room full of crosses. We can also see a skull symbol with an arrow pointing down a flight of stairs, and another message that says to leave the light on. We then learn that Ian went through this evaluation to see if he was qualified for a position, and I think we all know what position is being talked about here. Even though Elizabeth believes that Ian would probably not be a good fit given his difficulty handling hard situations, it's revealed that John Walker himself personally requested Ian for this position. Apparently, they have been in frequent communication with each other recently. Something else that gets revealed that makes John Walker's request a little less strange is that Ian has been working for this company already. He's just being evaluated for a higher position. Elizabeth reluctantly approves his psych eval, and Ian Parker is promoted to the head of safety and ethics. Oh, well, interesting position to put him in, I guess. Our next segment then has us looking back at our investigation, where we can see this photo of what looks to be someone in some kind of hazmat gear, and the text below reads that various blood samples were collected throughout the home. All of the blood samples contained high amounts of blank, a key symptom of organic traversal. Within a broken wall of the basement, a tar-like substance was found. This was the first documented encounter of the substance. Oh no, bro. It was a distilled form of blank. Our screen then begins to glitch out, but a little bit more text gets revealed to us. The perpetrator and entity were never found. The substance was collected for future use. Our fears have been confirmed. It is one of the lesser forms. Yikes. We then return to our footage, dating us on May 11th, 1993. All we can see is a couple of bricks, but very shortly a face begins to appear from the dark, and, well, I'll let you see for yourself. Well, that was certainly something. And if I had to guess, that kinda looks like our infamous faceless dog entity. However, before this tape ends, we get to hear from Ian Parker. But first, we have to cover this newspaper clipping in the background. December 4th, 1983. Dr. John Walker, the author of Theory of the Parallel and a renowned figure in the field of theoretical physics, has suffered an immeasurable loss with the death of his wife and daughter in a single-car accident in the Alaskan wilderness. The tragedy occurred on December 3rd on a remote stretch of road, amidst heavy snowfall that has hampered investigative efforts. Dr. Walker's 34-year-old daughter, Susan Walker Brown, and his wife, Marie Walker, aged 59, were both pronounced dead at the scene. Susan Brown leaves behind her husband, Jacob Brown. Dr. Walker, who is not present in the vehicle, is reportedly in deep mourning. While initial reports suggest the vehicle skidded off the road due to the hazardous winter conditions, investigators have noted markings at the scene. It gets a little hard to read here, but the next thing I can make out is that the car may have swerved off to avoid something, and I would not be surprised if this was the catalyst to John Walker being so eager to dimension hop. He's like the Kingpin from the Spider-Verse movies. However, the audio we hear from Ian Parker is also pretty telling. So from the sound of it, Ian Parker became hesitant about connecting the worlds, so John Walker got the board to remove him as head of safety and ethics. This rightfully has Ian pretty pissed off, especially considering how much Ian looked up to John. But now Ian has been stationed at the fire lookout station far away from the lab. It's said it's temporary, but Ian doesn't seem to believe that, ending off this tape with a sorrowful yet heard before message.
After all these years, all my hard work, everything I worked for.
Alright, there was a lot that happened in these last two tapes of Arcadia Chapter 3. So let's try our best to break it down and see if we can figure out what's going on here. Right off the bat, we have to talk about the faceless dog that Ian encountered as a child. If we remember back in paid programming, there was an episode of Mythical Creatures titled False Dogs, which, I mean, come on, this has to be a false dog. We don't know anything else about these false dogs, but if the thing we saw at the end of Monsters was in fact another false dog, then we know how terrifying they are. But that leads to my theory that I've been cooking up in my brain. I think Ian Parker may be our kidnapper. Now before you call me crazy, just think about it for a second. He was a huge fan of John Walker since he was at least 11 years old, considering he was reading his book at that time. And I am pretty sure the narration throughout paid programming was John Walker, which means it's highly likely that was all through the eyes of Ian Parker, hearing John's voice in his head. We read in the journal that there was a voice speaking to our kidnapper, and in the first journal entry, our kidnapper comes off as very regretful for what they had done, blaming it on the voice. The only thing, however, is we don't really know anyone as of yet that was close to Ian, except Elizabeth, who would have been the only person he told his darkest fears to, but she was emailing the admin trying to get Ian's files, unless it wasn't her accessing the account. But let's look back at all this footage in more order. We can see that on February 2nd at 11:14, our kidnapper, possibly Ian, is stalking this woman who is sitting by herself. Then the same night at 11:49, our kidnapper is driving away. He likely already has this woman. I imagine this lady is the same one in the photo labeled her, but I don't know if it's the same woman as the one labeled feed. Something also interesting to note is that in the journal entries, our kidnapper makes it sound like they are feeding the bodies to something, which would correlate with the footage of the long hand coming out from the darkness. But then in later entries, it said that they themselves have been feeding on them. So did they go through some kind of transformation? But anyways, back to the Ian theory. There was a reason that Ian had a change of heart when it came to connecting the worlds. He was in charge of safety and ethics after all. Is it possible that he created the 3-image test? It would kind of make sense why he would request a photo of an alternate universe's dog, to make sure it isn't secretly the dog from his past. Perhaps when he saw the dog from Parallel World 2, the dismantled one, it spooked him enough to not want to physically interact with these worlds at all, to which he is then banished to the watchtower, and witnesses the explosion from afar, making him the only survivor. But why would Ian then go on a killing spree? Well, he is one of the few people fully aware of what the worlds connecting actually could bring, and it doesn't help that he now has the voice of John Walker in his head feeding him lies, possibly. Someone who communicated to Ian even before the explosion. Way back to when The Farm was played, did Ian have his first contact with this alternate John? But that could literally all be crazy talk. Who knows? Something that I also find interesting is that it's as clear as ever that John Walker losing his family propelled him to try and connect these parallel worlds. There is only 20 days between the death of his family and the first attempt at connecting the worlds. But we also have to remember that this is all a cycle, and supposedly John Walker started it. I think it's possible that John Walker losing his family is some sort of canon event, and every time it happens, he tries to open up the multiverse and it fails, leading to one world being devastated by the abyss after the other. I won't go too much into the abyss since it is still pretty vague, but I am starting to believe that the abyss is actually a physical entity. I believe the abyss is literally that light in the sky. I wonder if the abyss operates kinda like Galactus, and I'm talking about the shitty Galactus from Rise of the Silver Surfer. But as you can all probably imagine, I can highly recommend you all check out Arcadia TV if you haven't already. This is definitely going to be looked back upon as one of the greats, alongside Gemini Horror and Local 58. Its way of storytelling is something we have all seen before in analog horror, but it knows how to do it all just right. I really can't wait to see how Chapter 3 continues on from here, as I am excited to explore more of this era of the world. I think it's cool that as the chapters go on, we sort of focus on different positions of the story that all end up forming a bigger picture the more you learn. So if you haven't already, be sure to check out Chilling Abyss to witness these horrors yourself. However, that'll probably be about it for this video. As always, be sure to keep on leaving me recommendations down below, whether it be in the YouTube comments or the community Discord, where, just like John Walker, I'm essentially always watching. But if you'll excuse me, I really don't want to miss the latest episode of Mythical Creatures.